Throw her file in the shredder and forget she ever existed. Admiral Grant Voss slammed his fist against the table, his voice cold as steel. Emily Carter drowned 3 days ago. Make sure every record says so. But 40 miles off the coast of San Diego, the woman he had ordered erased was still breathing, still floating on a shard of broken metal, still watching the stars and counting her way home to burn him down. Before we begin, subscribe and follow Emily's story all the way to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has traveled. The radio crackled at 4:47 in the morning, and Petty Officer Danny Cruz almost didn't report it because in his 3 years working the search grid off Point Loma, he had learned that most signals this far out were ghosts. Debris fields bouncing back sonar, fishing floats gone loose, sometimes a whale. "Command, I've got something," Cruz said anyway, leaning toward the panel. "Bearing 270, roughly 38 miles. It's faint, but it's steady. That's not a ghost. Ghosts don't stay put." Commander Michael Reynolds crossed the deck in 4 strides and took the headset from Cruz's hand. He was a big man who moved quietly, which unsettled people who expected big men to be loud. And he listened for a long moment with his eyes closed before he spoke. "That's an EPIRB pulse," Reynolds said. "Emergency beacon. Someone's out there and they turned it on themselves." "Sir, the storm cleared 3 days ago. Anybody in the water that long is dead," Reynolds finished. "I know the math, Cruz. Wake the medics anyway." Cruz hesitated. The Coast Guard already ran 2 sweeps out there. They called it no survivors. Reynolds handed the headset back. Then the Coast Guard missed something. Wake them. Jake Harrison was already awake when the call came because Jake Harrison was always awake, a habit stitched into him over 2 combat deployments and that no amount of shore leave had ever unstitched. He was the youngest medic on the SEAL support element and the most restless, and when Reynolds told him they were going out for a body recovery, he strapped his gear on without a word of complaint, even though every man on that boat knew there was no body to recover after 72 hours. "You really think there's someone alive out there?" Jake asked as the rigid hull boat cut across the black water. "I think there's a beacon someone turned on with their own hand," Reynolds answered. "Beacons don't turn themselves on. Corpses don't press buttons. Keep your eyes open." The junior operator beside Jake, a kid named Torres, barely a year out of training, laughed under his breath. 72 hours in the Pacific. Even if we find somebody, they're going to be gone. Brains cooked. Kidneys are cooked. Best case, we're pulling out a vegetable." "Torres," Reynolds said without turning around. "Sir, shut your mouth and watch the water." They found her at 5:31. She was lying on a twisted sheet of ship's hull, plating maybe 6 feet by 4, the kind of debris that shouldn't have floated at all but had, and she was so still that Jake's first thought was that Torres had been right. Then, as the spotlight swept across her, she lifted one hand and shielded her eyes from the beam, slow and deliberate, the way a person shields their eyes from something they've been expecting. "She's moving," Jake breathed. "Commander, she's alive. She's actually alive." "Get her aboard," Reynolds said. "Careful, slow. Her heart's been running on nothing for 3 days." Jake went over the side into the water and reached her first. Her lips were split, her skin burned dark and peeling across the shoulders, her eyes swollen half shut from salt and sun. By every rule he had ever learned, this woman should have been unconscious at best, dead at worst. And the first thing she did when he got his hands under her arms was turn her head toward him and ask a question in a voice that was cracked and raw but perfectly clear. "Which direction is north?" Jake froze. "What, north?" she repeated. "Which way? I need to know before you move me." "Ma'am, you have been in the water for 3 days. Let me get you to the boat, then we'll worry about—" "I've been tracking my drift by the stars for 70 hours, she said, and there was no panic in her voice, no fear, only a flat, exhausted urgency. "If you spin me around now, I lose the count. Just tell me which way is north." Jake looked back at Reynolds, who had come to the edge of the boat and was staring down at the woman with an expression Jake had never seen on the commander's face before. Something between confusion and recognition. "North's behind you," Reynolds called down. "Off your left shoulder." The woman closed her eyes and her lips moved, and Jake realized she was doing arithmetic. Actual arithmetic, correcting some running figure in her head that she had been carrying for 3 days in an open ocean with no food and no water. "Then we drifted 11 miles further south than I estimated," she murmured. "The current turned. That's why the first sweep missed me. I was under their search box the whole time. Jake had rescued a lot of people. He had pulled drowning sailors from capsized boats and dragged wounded men off of beaches under fire. He had never not once had a rescue subject explaining to him why the previous rescue attempt had failed. "Who are you?" he asked. "Get me on the boat," she said. "I'll answer everything. Get me on the boat first." They got her on the boat, a mile. Reynolds knelt beside her while the medics worked, and he studied her the way a man studies a puzzle whose pieces don't fit the picture on the box. She should have been delirious. 72 hours of dehydration produces confusion, hallucination, a slurred fog that no amount of willpower penetrates. But this woman's eyes tracked everything. She watched Jake set up the IV line. She watched Torres fumble with the blood pressure cuff. She watched Reynolds watch her. "Name," Reynolds said gently. "Emily Carter. Rank HM2, Hospital Corpsman, 2nd class. I was assigned to a research support vessel, the Meridian Dawn." A pause. What happened to the Meridian Dawn? Emily's cracked lips almost curved into something that wasn't a smile. "That," she said, "is a very good question." Jake got the IV in on the first try, and Emily watched the needle slide home and then said quietly, "You're fast. You've done that under stress before, combat." "Twice," Jake said, startled into answering. "It shows in your hands. Steady but quick. That's not classroom training." She let her head fall back. "You're better than you think you are." And Jake, who had spent his whole career quietly convinced that everyone around him was more capable than he was, felt something unclench in his chest that he hadn't known was clenched, and he didn't understand why a half-dead stranger's offhand comment should land so hard, but it did. Then Emily's eyes moved past Jake, past Reynolds, and fixed on Torres. The young operator was crouched near the stern, and he had gone a strange gray color under his tan, and there was a sheen of sweat on his face, even though the pre-dawn air off the water was cold. He was blinking too much. His hand had crept up to the back of his neck. "That man," Emily said, and her voice changed. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it, something else came online, something sharp and certain. "The young one. How long has he been sweating like that?" "Torres," Reynolds glanced over. "He's fine. He's not fine." Emily pushed herself up onto one elbow, and the effort made her whole body shake, but she pushed anyway. "Look at his skin. He's stopped sweating properly. He's confused. Ask him a question. Ask him something he should know cold." Reynolds, moving on instinct, now turned. "Torres, what's your mother's first name?" Torres blinked slowly. It's... His mouth worked. Nothing came out. And then his eyes rolled, and he began to tip sideways toward the deck. "Heat stroke," Emily said, and now the flat certainty in her voice was absolute. "Not exhaustion. Stroke. His core's cooking. He's been out here all night in full gear pulling on lines, and nobody noticed because you were all looking at me. Get his vest off. Get water on his neck, his armpits, his groin. Now. You have minutes, not hours." Jake looked at Reynolds. Reynolds looked at Emily, and then Reynolds did something that later, when he tried to explain it to his superiors, he would not be able to fully justify. He took an order from a half-dead corpsman he'd pulled out of the ocean 90 seconds earlier. "Do what she says," Reynolds barked. "Move." They moved. Jake ripped Torres's vest open and got the wet compresses onto him, where Emily said, and Emily lay back on the deck, directing the whole thing in a cracked whisper, correcting placement, calling for the temperature reading, telling them to stop, when Jake wanted to keep cooling and would have overcorrected the boy into shivering. Within 4 minutes, Torres's eyes had cleared. Within 10, he was talking. Within 20, he was sitting up, embarrassed and alive. And the entire SEAL element, 7 hardened men, stood on the deck of that boat in the gray morning light and stared at the woman they had come to recover as a corpse. "You just diagnosed a heat casualty," Reynolds said slowly, "on a member of my team, from across a boat, while you were the one dying of dehydration." "I'm a corpsman," Emily said, her eyes already closing. "It's the job." "No," Reynolds said. "No, that's not the job. Corpsmen treat what's in front of them. They don't read a stroke off a man's skin from 12 feet away and predict he's about to collapse before he does. That's not corpsman training. That's something else." But Emily Carter had passed out or was pretending to, and she didn't answer. The vessel that received them was a Navy support ship holding station off the coast. And by the time they got Emily into the medical bay, the sun was fully up, and the news of the impossible rescue had already run ahead of them. A woman recovered alive after 72 hours. A woman who had corrected the search grid math. A woman who had saved an operator's life before anyone had saved hers. The ship's medical officer, a lieutenant commander named Diaz, ran the full workup and came out of the bay shaking his head. "I don't understand it," Diaz said to Reynolds in the passageway. "Her electrolytes should be a catastrophe. Her kidneys should be shutting down. Instead, she's dehydrated, sunburned, and stable. It's like her body knew how to ration itself, like she'd rehearsed being stranded." "Maybe she had," Reynolds said. Diaz frowned. "There's something else. When I was drawing blood, she was watching my hands the whole time, and at one point she told me I'd nick the vein if I didn't change my angle. And I told her respectfully that I've been doing this for 11 years. He paused. "And then I nicked the vein, exactly the way she said I would." Reynolds didn't answer. He was thinking about the way Emily had looked at Torres, the way she had looked at Bomi and known somehow that his hands had worked under fire. "Commander," Diaz said. "Who is she?" "Her file says Hospital Corpsman, Second Class Emily Carter," Reynolds said. 29 years old, clean record. Assigned to the Meridian Dawn out of a civilian research contract. He rubbed his jaw. "Her file says a lot of things. I'm starting to think her file's a liar." Jake Harrison couldn't stay away from the medical bay. He told himself it was follow-up standard care checking on a patient. But the truth was that Emily Carter had gotten under his skin in a way he couldn't name, and he found himself standing in the doorway that afternoon watching her sleep. And when she opened her eyes, she didn't startle. She just looked at him like she'd known he was there. "You're the one who pulled me out," she said. "Jake Harrison." He came in and sat in the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I spent 3 days in the Pacific. A ghost of dry humor. Better than I have any right to." Jake studied her. Up close, out of the water, she looked younger and older at the same time. 29, her file said, but her eyes were the eyes of someone who had spent a very long time being careful. "Can I ask you something?" Jake said. "You're going to anyway. How did you know about Torres the heat stroke? How did you see it from across the boat when none of us did and were trained for it?" Emily was quiet for a moment. "You're trained to recognize it in yourselves and each other in a fight," she said. "You weren't looking for it in a rescue. Different context. The brain filters what it doesn't expect to see." She shifted against the pillow. "I've spent a lot of time in situations where I couldn't afford to filter anything out." "What kind of situations does a corpsman get into where she can't afford to miss anything?" And Emily looked at him with those careful eyes and said, "I'm a corpsman, Jake." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." "It's true," Jake agreed. "But it's not all of it, is it?" For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Somewhere down the passageway, a hatch clanged. Emily's fingers moved slightly against the blanket, and Jake noticed, because he was starting to notice everything about her, that even her small movements had a kind of economy to them. Nothing wasted, nothing nervous. "You want to know something I've learned," she said finally. "People show you who they are in the first 10 seconds, before they've decided what to hide. You walked in here and sat down close on my right side where you could see the door over my shoulder. You didn't even think about it. That's not a corpsman thing either. Somebody trained you to keep the exit in view. Who was it?" Jake felt the hair rise on his arms. "My first team lead, 3rd deployment. He kept you alive." "He did." "Then he did the most important job a person can do," Emily said, and her voice went somewhere quiet and far away for a second. "He gave you tools you didn't know you'd need until the day you needed them." She closed her eyes. "Somebody did that for me too, a long time ago." "Who?" But she had gone somewhere he couldn't follow, and she didn't answer. Reynolds pulled Emily's service file that evening and read it 3 times, and each time it made him more uneasy because the problem with the file was not what was in it, but what wasn't. Emily Carter, born in San Diego, enlisted at 22, which was late. Hospital corpsman training, top of her class, which fit. Assignments that were all legitimate, all clean, all boring. Field hospital rotations. A humanitarian deployment. A research support billet. And a gap. Between her enlistment at 22 and the age she should have enlisted at 18, there were 4 years that the file explained with 2 words: prior employment. No details, no company, no location. 4 years of a young woman's life reduced to a phrase that told him nothing, and in Reynolds' long experience, a 4-year hole in a service record that clean was not an accident of paperwork. Somebody had built that hole on purpose. He was still staring at it when the ship's intelligence officer, a quiet woman named Park, knocked on his door with a printout in her hand and a strange expression on her face. "Commander, I flagged Carter's file for the routine post-rescue review," Park said, "and I got a hit I've never seen before." "What kind of hit?" "There's a classified notation buried in her personnel record. It's not visible on the standard file. You have to be looking for it, and you have to have clearance to see it, which I barely do." Park set the printout on his desk. "It's a contact directive. It says that if Emily Carter is ever recovered under, quote, unusual operational circumstances, one specific individual is to be notified immediately, before anyone else, before her chain of command, before the Navy runs any investigation." Reynolds picked up the printout. "Who's the individual?" "A retired Navy Special Warfare Officer, Captain Richard Hayes." Park hesitated. "Commander, that name meant nothing to me, so I looked him up. Richard Hayes ran some of the most classified special operations selection programs in the country for 20 years. The kind of programs the public doesn't know exist. And when he retired, the directive to contact him about Emily Carter wasn't rescinded. It was renewed, every single year, by hand." Reynolds read the notation twice, then he looked up at Park. "A hospital corpsman," he said slowly, "does not have a retired black program selection officer standing by to be personally notified if she goes missing." "No, sir," Park said, "she does not." "Make the call." Richard Hayes arrived on the ship 2 days later, and he was not what Reynolds expected. He was in his late 60s, lean and weathered, with the kind of stillness that made younger men straighten up without knowing why. He came aboard, shook Reynolds' hand, and asked one question before anything else. "Is she alive?" "She's alive," Reynolds said. "She's recovering. Captain Hayes, I need to understand." "Take me to her," Hayes said. "Then I'll tell you what I can, which won't be everything, but it'll be more than you have now, and you're going to wish you didn't know it." They walked to the medical bay, and Reynolds tried once more. "Sir, with respect, I pulled that woman out of the ocean. My man Torres is alive because of her. I've got a right to know who she is." Hayes stopped walking. He turned and looked at Reynolds with pale, tired eyes. "Do you know who Admiral Thomas Carter was?" he asked. Reynolds went still. Every officer in the Navy knew the name. Admiral Thomas Carter had been a legend, a special operations commander, whose career was half public honor and half rumor, and who had died on a classified mission 14 years earlier, under circumstances the Navy had never fully explained. "Everybody knows Admiral Carter," Reynolds said. "He died overseas. Some kind of operation gone wrong." "Some kind of operation gone wrong," Hayes repeated softly. "Yes, that's the story." He started walking again. "Emily Carter is his daughter." The words landed in Reynolds' chest like a stone. His daughter. His only child. She was 15 when he died. Hayes' jaw tightened. And Thomas Carter did not raise his daughter to be an ordinary girl. From the time she could walk, he was training her. Navigation, survival, medicine, how to read a room, how to read a man, how to disappear. He told me once he was giving her the tools to survive a world he was afraid was coming for them both. Hayes stopped outside the bay door. And then that world came for him. "What are you saying?" Reynolds asked. "That his death wasn't an accident?" Hayes looked at him for a long moment. "I'm saying," he said quietly, "that in 14 years no one has ever shown me a body. No one has ever shown me a mission report that made sense. And I'm saying that the girl in that room has spent every one of those 14 years trying to prove what I've never been able to prove myself." He put his hand on the hatch. "So no, Commander. She's not just a corpsman. She's the last person alive who knows what her father found. And I think she just spent 72 hours in the ocean because someone finally figured out that she knows it." He opened the door. Emily was sitting up in the bed, and when she saw Hayes, her careful composure cracked for the first time since they'd pulled her from the water. Not much, just a tightening around the eyes, a small catch of breath. But Reynolds saw it, and he understood that whatever this old man was to her, it was something that went all the way down. "Uncle Rich," Emily said. "Hey, kid." Hayes crossed the room and took her hand in both of his, and for a moment neither of them said anything at all. Then Hayes said very gently, "You want to tell me why I got the call? I've been dreading for 14 years. You want to tell me why they pulled you out of the Pacific 40 miles from anywhere?" Emily's eyes moved to Reynolds, weighing him, deciding. "How much does he know?" she asked Hayes. "He knows your father's name. He knows you're not what your file says. The rest is yours to tell or keep. Emily looked at Reynolds for a long moment, and Reynolds had the distinct sensation of being evaluated more thoroughly than he had ever been evaluated in his life, every detail of him weighed and filed. "You took an order from me on that boat," she said, "about Torres. You didn't have to. Most commanders wouldn't have. Why did you—" Reynolds considered the question. "Because you were right," he said simply. "And because a man who won't take good information from a dying woman because she outranks his pride is a man who gets people killed. I've buried enough people. I'm not adding to the pile to protect my ego." Something shifted in Emily's face. A wall came down one brick. "The Meridian Dawn wasn't a research vessel," she said. "Not really, it was a cover. It was connected to the same people who took my father. I got a berth on it under my corpsman credentials because it was the only way to get close to what they were hiding. I spent 6 days on that ship gathering the last pieces of evidence I've been chasing for 14 years. Her voice was steady, but her hands had gone white around the blanket. "On the 6th day, they figured out who I was, and they figured out what I had." "What did you do?" Reynolds asked. "There were 9 of them and 1 of me," Emily said. "So I didn't fight. I went off the stern into the water in the middle of the storm because a person overboard in a storm 40 miles out is a dead person, and dead people don't testify. That's what they think happened. That's what they need to think happened." She met his eyes. "The storm was my cover, Commander. I went into the ocean on purpose, because it was the only place on Earth those people couldn't follow me." The medical bay was silent. Torres, who had been listening from the doorway, had gone pale. Jake, standing beside him, felt the whole shape of the last 3 days rearrange itself in his head. "You said dead people don't testify," Jake said. "Testify to what?" Emily reached under the collar of the hospital gown, and Reynolds tensed on instinct, and what she pulled out was a small waterproof case on a cord around her neck, salt-crusted and battered, but intact. "To this," she said, "I kept it on my body for 72 hours in the open ocean because I was not going to let it sink." She held it up. "Everything my father died for. Everything they killed him to bury. It's all in here. Names, dates, an operation that got American soldiers killed to protect a lie. And the man who ran it." "Who?" Reynolds asked. "Who's the man?" But Emily's hand had begun to tremble, the exhaustion and the sun, and the 3 days finally catching up all at once, and Hayes put his hand over hers and said, "Not now, rest now, you've carried it this far. Let it wait 1 more day." "It's already waited 14 years, Emily whispered, but her eyes were closing. "Then it can wait 1 more day, Hayes said. "You're not alone anymore, kid. You hear me? For the first time in 14 years, you're not alone." And Emily Carter, daughter of a dead admiral, keeper of a secret that had cost her father his life, and nearly cost her hers, let herself sleep. Reynolds followed Hayes out into the passageway. "I need to know the name," Reynolds said. "If there's a man out there who tried to have that woman killed who killed her father, and if that man is who I think he'd have to be, to make a body disappear and rewrite a service record and keep a directive alive for 14 years, then I need to know who I'm up against before he finds out she's alive." Hayes leaned against the bulkhead and closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, there was something in his face that Reynolds recognized because he had felt it himself in the worst moments of his career. The look of a man who has been carrying a weight alone for so long that he has forgotten what it was to set it down. 14 years ago, Hayes said, Thomas Carter came to me with a problem. He'd found something, an operation being run off the books using real soldiers as cover that had gotten a team killed and then buried them as a training accident to protect the men who'd ordered it. Thomas wanted to bring it into the light. I told him it was too big. I told him the people involved were too high up. I told him to walk away. Hayes's voice cracked just slightly. He didn't walk away. 3 months later, he was gone, officially killed on a mission that when I tried to pull the records turned out never to have been authorized by anyone I could find. Somebody authorized it, Reynolds said. Somebody did. Somebody with the reach to invent a mission, kill a man on it, and make the paperwork say it was hostile action. Hayes looked at Reynolds. You asked who I think we're up against. I think it's the same man Thomas was investigating. I think in 14 years he's only climbed higher. And I think when Emily surfaces with that evidence, she is going to point at someone whose name is going to make your blood run cold because it's going to be a name you've saluted. Reynolds absorbed this. Down the passageway, a young sailor passed oblivious carrying a tray of food. "There's something you're not telling me," Reynolds said. "You said you got the call you've been dreading for 14 years. You knew this day was coming. You've been waiting for it." Hayes was quiet for a long moment. When Thomas disappeared, he said finally, "I couldn't protect him. I'd told him to walk away, and he hadn't, and he died, and I have lived with that every day since. But I made a promise. I put that directive in Emily's file myself back channel so that if she ever surfaced in trouble, I'd be the first to know. And I renewed it every year with my own hand because I was not going to let Thomas Carter's daughter disappear the way he did while I sat home and told myself it was somebody else's problem." His jaw worked. "So yes, Commander, I've been waiting 14 years for this call. Half of me hoped it would never come because if it came, it meant she was in danger. And half of me needed it to come because it meant she was still alive to be in danger. And now it's here." Reynolds nodded slowly. "Then we finish it," he said. "Whatever it is, whoever he is." Hayes looked at him with something that was almost surprise. "You barely know her. You've got a career. You've got a family, I'd guess. This is not your fight, Commander. This is a fight that ended careers and buried an admiral. You can walk away right now and nobody would blame you." Reynolds thought about Torres alive because a dying woman had refused to filter out what everyone else had missed. He thought about the 4-year hole in a service record built to hide a girl her father had trained to survive a world that was coming for them both. He thought about a woman keeping a case around her neck for 3 days in an open ocean because she would not let the truth sink. "She saved my man before we saved her," Reynolds said. "She had every reason to lie there and die, and she chose to keep an operator I'm responsible for alive instead. I don't walk away from people like that." He straightened. "And I've buried men who died for lies dressed up as missions. If there's a chance that woman's father was one of them, and the man who did it is still wearing a uniform, then it became my fight the second I pulled her out of the water." Hayes looked at him for a long moment. Then for the first time since he'd come aboard, the old man's shoulders eased just slightly as though a weight he'd carried alone for 14 years had found at last a second pair of hands. "All right," Hayes said quietly, "then God help us both. Because I'll tell you what I've never told anyone, Commander, and you can decide for yourself what kind of man you've signed up to fight." He leaned in close and he lowered his voice until it was barely more than breath. But before he could speak the name, the ship's alarm began to sound. Reynolds' head snapped up. Not a drill. He knew the difference. This was the tone that meant something was happening right now. And a heartbeat later, Petty Officer Cruz came around the corner at a dead run, his face white. "Commander," Cruz gasped. "Commander, we just got a priority order from up the chain. Way up the chain." "What order?" "Uh-oh." "They know," Cruz said. "Sir, I don't know how, but they know Carter's alive. Somebody leaked the rescue report, and there's a flag officer inbound by helicopter arriving in 20 minutes with orders to take personal custody of the survivor and everything recovered with her." Cruz swallowed. "The order came in under a name I've never seen carry that kind of weight. Some admiral working national security. Sir, he's not part of our chain. He's got no business taking custody of anybody. But the order's got authorizations on it that I can't override." The passageway went very still. Reynolds turned slowly to look at Hayes. And Richard Hayes had gone gray, the color of the ocean before a storm, and he was staring at Cruz with an expression of such old and terrible recognition that Reynolds understood the answer before he asked the question. "The Admiral inbound," Reynolds said. "What's his name?" Cruz looked at the printout in his shaking hand. "Voss," he said. "Admiral Grant Voss." And Richard Hayes closed his eyes and said, in a voice that came from 14 years down at the bottom of a grief he had never once set down, "That's him. That's the man who killed her father. And he's coming here to finish what the ocean couldn't." Down the passageway, in the medical bay, Emily Carter's eyes came open in the dark. She was already moving when the alarm cut through the ship, swinging her legs off the bed before the second tone finished sounding, and the IV line pulled taut in her arm until she reached over and eased it out herself, pressing her thumb against the puncture the way she'd been taught before she was old enough to drive. Jake caught her at the door. Whoa, you can't be up. You've been out of the water for 4 days. Your body isn't..." "Who's coming?" Emily said. "What?" "The alarm. That's not a fire tone, and it's not a man overboard. Somebody's inbound, and the ship doesn't like it. Who's coming, Jake?" Jake hesitated, and that half-second of hesitation told Emily everything she needed to know, because she had spent 14 years reading the space between what people said and what they were afraid to say. "It's him, isn't it?" she said quietly. "He found out I'm alive." "Emily, say the name." Reynolds came through the hatch with Hayes a step behind him, and it was Reynolds who answered because he had already decided that this woman had earned the truth without softening. "Admiral Grant Voss," Reynolds said, "inbound by helicopter, 19 minutes out. He's got custody orders for you and everything recovered with you." For one long moment, Emily didn't move at all, and then something happened to her face that Jake would remember for the rest of his life, because it wasn't fear and it wasn't grief. It was the opposite of both. It was the look of a person who has been waiting in a dark room for 14 years and has finally heard footsteps on the stairs. "Voss," she said, just the one word, like tasting something she'd been starving for. "You know him," Reynolds said. "I've never met him." Emily steadied herself against the bulkhead. "I've spent 14 years learning everything there is to know about a man I've never been in the same room with. I know what he eats for breakfast. I know the name of the aide who screens his calls. I know he keeps a photo on his desk of a mission he says he commanded, and I know that mission never happened." Her voice dropped. "And I know he's the last person who ever saw my father alive." Hayes stepped forward. "Emily, listen to me. If he's coming in person, it means he's scared. It means he can't trust anyone else to do this. That's good, and it's very, very bad. Good because it means the evidence you're carrying terrifies him. Bad because a scared Grant Voss is the most dangerous thing in this ocean." "How long does he have custody authority?" Emily asked Reynolds. "The orders, how airtight are they?" "Airtight enough that my intelligence officer can't override them," Reynolds said. "He's got national security authorizations stacked 3 deep. On paper, when that helicopter lands, you belong to him." "Then we don't let it get to paper," Emily said. "What does that mean?" Emily looked at Reynolds and then at Hayes and then at Jake, and there was a calculation running behind her eyes so fast that none of them could follow it. "It means Grant Voss made one mistake," she said. "He assumed that a custody order is the same thing as control. It isn't. A custody order gives him my body. It doesn't give him what's in my head, and it doesn't give him the evidence unless he knows where the evidence is." She reached up and touched the empty place at her collar where the case had hung, and Jake realized with a jolt that at some point in the last 4 days, without any of them seeing, she had moved it. "He thinks the evidence is a thing he can seize. He's wrong. The evidence is already gone somewhere he can't reach. All he can seize is me, and I'm going to let him." "Absolutely not," Hayes said. "Emily, no. I did not spend 14 years keeping that directive alive to hand you to the man who—" "Uncle Rich." Emily's voice was gentle, but it cut through his like a blade. "I have thought about this moment for 14 years. Every version of it. And in every version, the one thing I could never figure out was how to get close enough to Grant Voss to end this without him seeing me coming. I couldn't reach him. He's too high, too protected, too careful." She almost smiled. "And now he's flying himself out to the middle of the ocean to reach me. Do you understand what he's doing? He's leaving the fortress. He's coming down to the water. He'll never be more exposed than he is in the next 19 minutes. And he doesn't even know it because, in his mind, I'm a corpse that inconveniently kept breathing." The medical bay had gone completely silent. Torres in the corner had stopped pretending not to listen. "You want to let him take you," Reynolds said slowly. "I want him to think he's taking me out," Emily corrected. "There's a difference, and the difference is everything." Reynolds was quiet for a moment. He was a careful man, a man who had kept operators alive for 2 decades by never falling in love with a clever plan, and every instinct he had was screaming that handing a survivor to the very man who'd tried to kill her was insane. "Talk me through it," he said. "All of it. Because if I'm going to let a flag officer walk off my ship and with a woman I pulled out of the ocean, I need to understand exactly what I'm agreeing to, and I need to believe it works." "How long?" Emily asked. 17 minutes now. Then I'll talk fast." She sat back down on the edge of the bed because her legs were still not entirely her own, and she laid it out. "Voss can't hurt me on this ship," she said. "Too many witnesses. Too many people have already seen me alive. My rescue's in the log. Torres is walking around telling everyone the medic saved his life. Half the crew knows my name by now. If I die in the next hour on this vessel, that's a scandal. Voss can't survive custody order or not. So when he takes me, he has to keep me alive, at least until he's somewhere private. That's my window. Where's he going to take you? Jake asked. There's only one place that makes sense. He's got a secure facility ashore. He'll want me somewhere he controls completely, where he can find out what I know and where I put the evidence before he decides what to do with me. Emily's jaw tightened. He needs to interrogate me before he kills me. That's the whole reason he's coming himself. He can't send someone else because someone else might hear what I have to say. He has to be the only one in the room. And a man who has to be the only one in the room is a man who's alone. Emily, Hayes said, if he gets you somewhere he controls completely, we can't reach you. We can't protect you. Whatever you're planning, it puts you alone with the most dangerous man in the country and no backup. I know, Emily said. That's why I need 3 things from the people in this room, and I need you to agree fast because we're down to 15 minutes. Reynolds folded his arms. Name them. First, the evidence has to move again right now to somewhere none of us can be made to give up under pressure. Hayes, that's you. You've spent 14 years building channels Voss doesn't know about. Use them. If I disappear, that evidence surfaces in 100 places at once, and no custody order in the world can bury it. That's my insurance. As long as Voss thinks he can still find and destroy the evidence, he keeps me alive to tell him where it is. The second he stops believing that I'm dead. So the game is to keep him believing it just long enough. Hayes stared at her, and Jake watched the old man's face move through disbelief, then fear, then a grudging, grief-stricken pride. Your father used to plan exactly like this, Hayes said quietly, backwards from the enemy's fear. He taught me, Emily said. Second thing, Reynolds, when Voss takes me, you can't fight it. You have to let it happen clean in front of witnesses by the book. Salute him. Sign whatever he puts in front of you. Make him believe you're a good commander who follows orders even when he doesn't like them. Because the moment you push back, Voss knows something's wrong, and a suspicious Voss is a Voss who kills me on the ship and takes the scandal, or worse, decides I've already talked and there's no reason to keep any of you alive either. She looked around the bay. Every person who's heard my name in the last 4 days is now a problem Grant Voss has to solve. You need him to believe you're not a threat. All of you, right up until you are. Torres in the corner had gone pale again, and this time it wasn't heat stroke. He'd kill the whole crew, Torres said. Over this. He killed a team of American soldiers to hide one operation, Emily said. He killed a decorated admiral and made the Navy call it a mission. He is not a man who counts. Don't make the mistake of thinking there's a number of bodies that would stop him. There isn't. The bay was silent. Third thing, Emily said. Jake? Jake straightened. Anything. When Voss takes me off this ship, I'm going to give you something. In front of him, out in the open, and you're going to accept it like it's nothing, like it's medical follow-up, like a corpsman handing off a patient's paperwork. Voss can't know it matters. If he thinks it matters, he takes it, and then it's useless. So you have to be the least interesting person in the room. Can you do that? Can you look at me and take the most important thing anyone's ever handed you and act like it's a clipboard? Jake swallowed. What is it? A key, Emily said. Not literally. A piece of information that only makes sense with the evidence Hayes is going to move. Alone, it's meaningless. Together, they end Grant Voss. I'm splitting them on purpose because the moment I'm in his custody, he's going to take me apart looking for the whole thing, and I need to be able to tell him honestly that I don't have all of it. Because I won't. Half of it will be with Hayes and half of it will be with you, and I'll be carrying nothing but the memory of where both halves went. Her eyes met Jake's steady and dark. I'm going to be alone with a man who wants to torture the truth out of me, Jake. And the kindest thing you can do for me is make sure there's a piece of it I genuinely cannot give him, no matter what he does. Do you understand what I'm asking you to hold? Jake understood. He understood that she was asking him to be the reason she could survive whatever Voss did to her, because a person who can't give up the secret can't be broken for it, only killed for spite. And Emily was betting her life that Voss was too calculating for spite. I've got it, Jake said. His voice was rough. Whatever it is, I've got it. I won't blink. 11 minutes, Reynolds said, checking his watch. And that was when Emily's careful control slipped just for a heartbeat, and something young and frightened surfaced in her face, and she looked at Richard Hayes the way a 15-year-old girl might look at the last adult on earth who loved her father. "Uncle Rich," she said, "if this doesn't work, if I'm wrong about him keeping me alive." She stopped, started again. "My whole life everyone kept telling me to walk away from this. My teachers, my recruiter, you once a long time ago. And I never could because it felt like if I walked away, my dad died for nothing, and I'd be the only proof he was ever right." She wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist, quick and impatient, like she was angry at them for filling. "I need you to know that if I don't come back, it wasn't nothing. It was never nothing. Even if we lose, him coming out here scared in person means my dad was right about all of it. And that's worth my life. It's worth my life, Uncle Rich." Hayes crossed the room and took her face in his hands, this old warrior who had buried her father in his heart 14 years ago, and his voice shook. "You listen to me, Emily Carter," he said. "Your father did not train you for 11 years so you could die brave in the ocean or die brave in Grant Voss's basement. He trained you to win and come home. Winning is coming home. Do you hear me? The mission is not the evidence. The mission is you walking back onto the ship on your own 2 feet. That's the only version of this where your father was right. The rest is just paperwork." He pressed his forehead to hers. "So you go do what you have to do, and then you come home. You come home, kid. That's an order from the last man alive who has the right to give you one." Emily nodded against his hands, and then she pulled herself back together, brick by brick, the wall going back up. And when she stepped away from Hayes, she was HM2. Emily Carter again, a corpsman with a clean record and careful eyes, and there was no trace of the frightened girl at all. "Somebody get me a uniform," she said. "I'm not meeting Grant Voss in a hospital gown." They found her a set of utilities. She dressed with the door, cracked fast and economical. And when she came out, she looked like any other sailor, which was the point. And Reynolds understood that this too was a kind of weapon, this ability to become unremarkable at will. 6 minutes, Reynolds said. "Walk me through the deck," Emily said. "Where he'll land, where the witnesses will be, who reports to who." Reynolds walked her through it in fast-clipped sentences, and Emily listened and nodded and filed it all away. And at one point she stopped him and said, "Your flight deck officer, the one who will marshal the helicopter in, is he loyal to you or to the chain?" "To me," Reynolds said. "Why?" "Because when this is over, whichever way it goes, someone's going to try to rewrite what happened on that deck," Emily said. "The way they rewrote my father's death, and the only defense against that is a witness who won't fold. You need at least one man out there who'll swear to exactly what he saw, no matter who tells him to forget it. Pick him now." Reynolds looked at her with something close to awe. "You're already fighting the war that comes after this one." "That's the only war that ever mattered," Emily said. "Voss doesn't win by taking me. He wins by controlling the story afterward the way he's controlled it for 14 years. So we don't just have to survive today. We have to survive today in a way that can't be erased tomorrow. Everything on that deck has to happen in front of people who remember on record where he can't unhappen it later." She turned to Cruz, who had been hovering. You logged my rescue. You said my name into a radio. That makes you a witness he can't uninvent. Are you scared?" Cruz, 23 years old, swallowed hard. "Terrified, ma'am." "Good," Emily said. "Scared people remember details. Write down everything you saw today the second I'm off this ship. Times, names, what was said. Sign it and give it to someone you trust who isn't on this vessel. You just became important sailor. Don't waste it." 4 minutes, Reynolds said. "He's on final approach." They moved toward the flight deck, and Emily walked in the middle of them, and Jake stayed close on her right side, and she noticed, and she almost smiled through everything else. "You're on my right again," she murmured. "Keeping the exit." "Old habit," Jake said. "Keep it today," Emily said. "Whatever happens on that deck, you watch the whole scene, not just me. If it goes wrong, it'll go wrong from a direction nobody's looking. That's how it always goes wrong." They reached the hatch to the flight deck, and Emily stopped, and for one last moment she gathered herself, and Reynolds saw her do the thing he'd seen elite operators do before going through a door into gunfire, the thing where a person sets down every part of themselves that isn't needed for the next 10 minutes and picks up only the parts that are. 2 minutes, Reynolds said. "You sure about this?" "No," Emily said honestly. "But I'm sure it's the only door that's ever going to open." He's coming down out of the sky, Commander. In 14 years, he has never once come down out of the sky for me. I'm not going to waste it being sure. The helicopter came in loud, and the flight deck crew marshaled it down, and Reynolds' chosen flight officer stood exactly where Emily had told him to stand, watching everything. And when the rotor spun down and the door opened, Admiral Grant Voss stepped out onto the deck of the ship. He was smaller than Emily had imagined, and that surprised her because she had spent 14 years building him into something enormous. He was an ordinary-sized man in an admiral's uniform, with an admiral's stars and an admiral's certainty, and he had two men with him who were not sailors, who moved like the kind of men Emily's father had trained, and he came across the deck toward Reynolds with his hand already out. "Commander Reynolds," Voss said. His voice was warm and easy, the voice of a man who had never once been told no. "Good work out here, hell of a rescue. I've read the report." "Admiral," Reynolds said, and he saluted, and Emily watched him become exactly the man she'd asked him to be, a good commander following orders he didn't love. "We're honored to have you aboard, sir. Though I have to say, we weren't expecting a flag officer for a survivor recovery." "No, I imagine not." Voss's eyes were already moving past Reynolds, scanning the small cluster of people by the hatch, and they found Emily, and they stopped. For a fraction of a second, something crossed his face. Not recognition, because he'd never met her. Something worse. The specific attention a man gives to a problem he thought he'd already solved. "This the survivor. HM2 Emily Carter," Sir Reynolds said. "She's recovering well. Remarkably well." "So I hear." Voss walked toward her slow, and his two men fanned out with him, and Emily stood very still and let him come. 72 hours in the water. That's a Navy record near enough. You must be a remarkable young woman, petty officer." "I had good training, sir," Emily said. Level, calm, a corpsman addressing an admiral. "Did you?" Voss stopped in front of her, and up close his eyes were pale and flat and utterly without warmth, and Emily looked into them and saw the last thing her father ever saw. "Where'd you train, Petty Officer Carter? Your file's a little thin on that." And here it was, the first move, the first probe, and Emily met it without a flicker. "Field hospital rotation, sir. Humanitarian deployment. The usual corpsman track." "The usual corpsman track," Voss repeated softly. "And before that? Before you enlisted at 22, your file says prior employment. Doesn't say what." "Restaurant work mostly, sir," Emily said. "Waitressing. Nothing that made the file interesting." For a long, terrible moment, Grant Voss studied her, and Emily held his gaze with the bland patience of a junior enlisted sailor who has no idea she's standing 3 feet from her father's murderer. And Jake, watching from her right, thought his heart was going to come out of his chest because he could see what it was costing her, the sheer will it took to look into that face and lie without her hands shaking. "Waitressing," Voss said at last. "Sure." He didn't believe her. Emily could see that he didn't believe her, but she could also see the thing she'd bet everything on, which was that his not believing her only made him want to take her somewhere private. More, not less, because a Grant Voss who suspected who she was needed to know what she'd found and where she'd put it before he could ever be safe again. Admiral Reynolds said carefully, "With respect, is there a concern with Petty Officer Carter I should be aware of? She's a member of the Naval Service under my care right now, and if there's a security issue." "There's no issue, Commander," Voss said, smoothly turning. "There's a debrief. Petty Officer Carter was aboard a vessel of interest when it went down. National Security has questions about what she may have seen. Standard stuff. I'm taking personal custody because the questions are above your clearance, and mine both, and it's faster if I just handle it myself." He produced a folded set of orders and held them out to Reynolds. "It's all in there. Sign at the bottom, and I'll take her off your hands and let you get back to your ocean." Reynolds took the orders. He read them slowly, and Emily watched him perform the reluctance perfectly, the good officer double-checking before he complied. "These are in order," Reynolds said finally. He didn't like the words in his mouth, and it showed just enough to be believable. "I'll need her to acknowledge the transfer of custody in front of witnesses. Ship's procedure, sir. Protects everybody." "Of course," Voss said, and Emily understood that Reynolds had just done something clever, had just forced the whole transfer into the open in front of the flight deck crew, on the record exactly as she'd wanted. "Petty Officer Carter," Reynolds said formally, "do you understand that you're being transferred to the custody of Admiral Voss for debriefing?" "I understand, sir," Emily said. "And you're going voluntarily and in good health?" "I am, sir." And then Emily turned casually, like it was an afterthought, to Jake. Corsman Harrison, my discharge paperwork. You've got my treatment summary and the follow-up protocol. Admiral, my medic, will want to hand off my medical file so whoever debriefs me knows my condition. Is that all right? Voss waved a hand, impatient, uninterested. Fine, fine, hand it off. And Jake stepped forward and Emily reached into the breast pocket of her borrowed utilities and pulled out a single folded sheet of paper, and she held it out to him, and Jake took it, and their eyes met for half a second, and Emily said in the flat, bored voice of a patient handing off her paperwork, "Follow up in 2 weeks. Keep it somewhere it won't get lost." "Yes, ma'am," Jake said, and he folded the paper once more and put it in his own pocket like it was nothing, like it was a clipboard, and Grant Voss, 3 feet away, watched the whole thing and saw a corpsman handing off a medical form and thought nothing of it at all. It was the best acting Jake Harrison would ever do in his life, and no one would ever know. "All right," Voss said, "we're wheels up in 5. Petty officer with me." And Emily Carter walked across the flight deck toward the helicopter, toward the man who had killed her father, and she did it with her chin level and her steps steady. And behind her, Richard Hayes stood at the hatch, with his fists clenched at his sides, and tears he refused to let fall because he had spent 14 years terrified of this exact moment, and he was watching it happen, and he could not lift a hand to stop it, because stopping it was the one thing that would get her killed. At the helicopter door, Emily paused. She turned back once, and her eyes found Reynolds and then Hayes and then Jake, and she gave them nothing, no signal, no last look, because a last look was the kind of thing Grant Voss would notice. But as she stepped up into the helicopter, she said one thing pitched just loud enough to carry over the spinning rotors, addressed to no one in the tone of a tired survivor making small talk. "Cold down there," she said. "In the water. You'd be amazed what a person thinks about 3 days in the dark. You start putting things in order, deciding what matters, what you'd do if you ever got the chance." Voss, climbing in behind her, half heard it and didn't care. But Hayes heard it, and Hayes understood it, because it was the last thing Thomas Carter had ever said to him 14 years ago before he walked into a mission that didn't exist. You start putting things in order, deciding what matters. She was telling him she was ready. She was telling him this was the plan, the whole plan, the plan Thomas Carter's daughter had been building since she was 15 years old. The helicopter door closed. It lifted off the deck, and it banked, and it carried Emily Carter away across the water, toward the coast, toward whatever Grant Voss had waiting for her, and the men she left behind stood on the flight deck and watched it shrink to a speck and then to nothing. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Reynolds turned to his flight deck officer. "You saw all of that. Every second, sir. Write it down, now, every word, you. Times and all." "Already on it, sir." Reynolds turned to Jake, and his voice dropped so only the two of them could hear it. "What did she give you?" Jake pulled the folded paper halfway out of his pocket and glanced at it, and his face went strange. "It's a follow-up form," he said. "It's an actual medical follow-up form. Blood pressure, targets, hydration schedule, the works." He looked up. "Commander, there's nothing on here. It's a real form." Hayes, coming up beside them, held out his hand. "Let me see it." Jake gave it to him. Hayes scanned it once, twice, and then something in the old man's weathered face cracked open into an expression that was half laughter and half grief. "She's smarter than her father," Hayes said quietly. "God help us, she's smarter than Thomas ever was." "What is it?" Reynolds demanded. Hayes turned the form around. At the bottom in the section for the follow-up appointment, in the neat handwriting of a corpsman filling out a routine document, was a date and a time and a location. "That's not a medical appointment," Hayes said. "That's a dead drop, a place and a time. She's telling us where to be and when." His hand tightened on the paper. "She's not just letting Voss take her. She's running us. All of us. She had this plan before he ever landed. The whole thing, the custody, the transfer, letting him think he won. She's been 3 moves ahead of everyone on this deck the entire time, and none of us saw it because we were all so busy being afraid for her." Reynolds looked at the paper. Then he looked at the empty sky where the helicopter had vanished. "Where's the location?" he asked. Hayes read it, and the color drained from his face all over again. "It's Voss's own facility," Hayes said. "The secure site ashore, the place he's taking her right now." He looked up, and his eyes were wild with something between terror and hope. "She's not telling us where to meet her afterward. She's telling us where to come get her. She's giving us the front door to the fortress Grant Voss spent 14 years hiding behind. And the only reason she could get it to us is that she let him carry her through it. Torres, listening, said what everyone was thinking. That's insane. That's completely insane. She walked into his prison on purpose so she could send us the address. She did more than that, Jake said slowly, and he was staring at the form, and something in it had just come clear to him. Look at the time. The follow-up time. It's not now. It's not tonight. It's 48 hours from now. He looked up. She's telling us she can survive in there for 48 hours. She's telling us how long we've got. She did the math the same way she did the math on the current in the water. She calculated how long Grant Voss will keep her alive, trying to get the evidence out of her, and she's giving us every hour of it, and then she's telling us to come. The flight deck was silent except for the wind. 48 hours, Reynolds said. 48 hours, Hayes confirmed. To find a way into a black facility that officially doesn't exist, get past a man who's killed everyone who ever got close to the truth, and pull her out before he decides she's told him everything she's going to tell him. He folded the form and put it in his pocket, and when he looked up, the grief was gone from his face, and in its place was something Reynolds had not seen there before. The face of a man with a mission again, after 14 years of having only a grave. Commander Reynolds, Hayes said, you told me an hour ago that this became your fight the second you pulled her out of the water. I'm going to hold you to that because I can't do this alone, and I've got 48 hours to do the one thing I failed to do 14 years ago. His voice was iron. I couldn't save Thomas. I am not going to fail his daughter. Are you in all the way in because there's no walking away after this? The second we move on that facility, we're at war with a man who can rewrite the whole Navy's memory. If we lose, we don't just die, we disappear. Like Thomas. Like she almost did. Nobody will even know we tried. Reynolds looked at Jake and at Torres alive because of a woman now flying into a lion's mouth to hand them the key to the cage. He looked at Cruz 23 and terrified and already writing down everything he'd seen. He looked at the empty sky. My whole career, Reynolds said quietly, I've followed orders. Some of them I hated. Some of them cost me sleep I'm never getting back. But I followed them because that's the deal. That's the uniform. He turned to face Hayes fully, and then a half-dead woman on my boat took one look at my youngest man and saved his life before she saved her own, and I realized I've spent 20 years wondering what I'd do if I ever got an order that was wrong, all the way down to the bottom, and whether I'd have the guts to say no. His jaw set. Grant Voss just handed me that order. Sign here, Commander, and let me fly your survivor off to a facility that doesn't exist, no questions asked. And I signed it. I signed it because she told me to, because it was the only way to save her. He took a breath. So no, I'm not walking away. I signed his paper. Now I'm going to go tear down everything that paper was hiding. Count me all the way in, Captain Hayes, whatever it costs. Hayes gripped his hand. Then we've got 48 hours, Hayes said, and a woman on the inside who's smarter than all of us put together. God help Grant Voss. He thinks he just caught a survivor. The old man's eyes went hard and bright. He has no idea he just carried Thomas Carter's daughter through his own front door, and she's been waiting her entire life to walk through it. And 40 miles away, in the belly of a helicopter, racing toward the coast, Emily Carter sat across from the man who murdered her father, and she folded her hands in her lap, and she began quietly and invisibly to count. She counted the whole flight not out of fear, but because counting was how her father had taught her to stay a person, when everything around her was designed to make her stop being one. Count the seconds. Count the men. Count the doors. A person who is counting is a person who is still deciding things, and Emily Carter had decided a long time ago that Grant Voss would never take the one thing from her that he'd taken from her father, which was the ability to choose. Voss watched her across the cabin the entire way in. He didn't speak. That was a tactic too, and Emily knew it. The long silence meant to unsettle, to let a prisoner fill the quiet with fear. So she gave him nothing to read. She looked at her hands. She looked tired. She looked like exactly what her file said. She was a corpsman who'd survived the ocean and now just wanted to sleep. But underneath, she was cataloging everything. The two men who weren't sailors, the way they deferred to Voss, but only just the way men defer to someone they'd kill in a heartbeat if the money changed. The sidearm the taller one carried worn for a right-handed draw. The way Voss's own hands stayed perfectly still, the hands of a man who had learned long ago never to fidget, because fidgeting is information. When they landed and they walked her inside, Emily let herself be walked. She didn't resist, didn't look around too much, didn't do any of the things that would tell them she was memorizing the route. Left turn, 22 paces. A door that needed a code, and the taller man's hand blocked her view of it, which meant they were careful, which meant this was a real facility and not a bluff. They put her in a room with a table and 2 chairs and left her alone, and Emily sat down and folded her hands and began quietly to wait, because the next move was Voss's and she needed him to make it. He made her wait 4 hours. Another tactic. Emily used the 4 hours to rest, actually rest, because she was still 4 days out of the ocean and her body was running on borrowed strength, and she was going to need every ounce of it. She slowed her breathing. She let the exhaustion pull at her, but not under. And when the door finally opened and Grant Voss walked in and sat down across from her, she looked up at him with the calm of a woman who had used his 4 hours better than he had. "You slept?" Voss observed. He seemed almost annoyed by it. "I've been tired for 4 days, sir," Emily said. "Drop the sir." Voss laced his fingers on the table. "We both know you're not a corpsman, or you're not only a corpsman. A real HM2 spends 4 hours locked in a strange room after being pulled out of the ocean, and she panics. She cries. She bangs on the door. You sat down and went to sleep." He tilted his head. "That's not training you get in a field hospital. So let's not waste each other's time. Who are you?" And this was the first real move of the real game, and Emily had rehearsed it 10,000 times, and she played it exactly as her father would have. She told him the truth. Most of it. "My name is Emily Carter," she said. "My father was Admiral Thomas Carter. He trained me from the time I was a child, and I got a berth on the Meridian Dawn because I've spent 14 years trying to find out what happened to him." She held Voss's flat, pale eyes. "I think you already know all of that. I think you knew it the second you saw my face on that deck. So you're right, let's not waste time." Something moved behind Voss's eyes, not surprise, he'd suspected. But there was a satisfaction in having it confirmed, the specific satisfaction of a hunter who tracked a thing for years and finally had it in the light. "Thomas Carter's daughter," Voss said softly. "I wondered, you have his eyes." He had the same way of looking at a man like he was reading the fine print. He leaned back. "Your father was the finest officer I ever served with. I mean that. It's the great tragedy of my life that it ended the way it did." "You mean the way you ended it," Emily said. The words hung in the air between them, and Grant Voss did not flinch, did not deny, did not perform outrage. He simply looked at her, and after a moment he smiled, and it was the coldest thing Emily had ever seen. "You've been carrying that a long time," Voss said. "That certainty, it must be exhausting. Being so sure for 14 years with nothing to show for it." He spread his hands. "But here we are. So let's talk about what you think you have. Because that's the only thing that matters now, Emily. Not what happened to your father. That's history. What matters is what you took off the Meridian Dawn and where you put it." And there it was. The whole game in one sentence. He needed the evidence, and he needed to know where it was, and until he had both, Emily Carter was worth more to him alive than dead. Her father's math running exactly as she'd calculated. "I'll tell you where it is," Emily said. Voss went very still. "But not today," Emily continued, "because the moment I tell you where it is, I stop being useful, and I know what happens to people who stop being useful to you. My father stopped being useful to you. So here's how this is going to go, Admiral. You're going to keep me alive and comfortable, and every day I'm going to give you a piece of it, a little more. And the day you stop keeping me alive is the day the rest of it surfaces in 100 places you can't reach, because I'm not stupid enough to be the only copy." She smiled, and it was almost gentle. "You taught me that, actually, or my father did, but he learned it watching men like you. Never be the only copy." Voss studied her for a long moment, and then he did something that told Emily she was in more danger than she'd calculated, because he laughed a real laugh, warm and amused. "That's good," he said. "That's very good. You've thought this through. Insurance a slow bleed, keeping yourself useful. It's exactly what I'd do." He leaned forward. "But you've made one mistake, Emily, and it's the same mistake your father made, and it's going to cost you the same way it cost him." His voice dropped. "You think this is a negotiation. You think you have leverage. You think that because you're clever, you're safe. He shook his head slowly. But cleverness only works on men who have something to lose. And I have already decided to lose everything, if that's what it takes, rather than let what's in your evidence come to light. Do you understand what that means? It means your insurance doesn't work on me. Let it surface in 100 places. I'll burn down all 100. I've done it before. I did it to your father, and he was a better planner than you'll ever be. For the first time, Emily felt real fear, cold and specific, because she had built her entire plan on the assumption that Voss valued his own survival, and he was telling her calmly that he didn't. But she didn't let it show. She had spent 14 years learning not to let it show. Then why keep me alive at all, she asked. If my insurance doesn't scare you, if you'll burn 100 copies, why not kill me right now? And Grant Voss's smile faded and something older and hungrier came into his face. And Emily understood that she'd found the real thing, the thing underneath. Because your father hid something from me, Voss said quietly. 14 years ago, right at the end. He had a piece of it I never found, and it's the only piece that can actually touch me. Everything else is deniable. Everything else is your word against mine, and I'm an admiral, and you're a corpsman with a grudge and a dead father. But there's one thing, Emily. One document. One recording. I never knew exactly what it was, only that it existed, because your father told me it existed right at the end when he thought it would save him. Voss's hands had curled into fists on the table. It didn't save him, but it's been out there for 14 years, and I have not slept a full night in all that time, because somewhere in the world is the one thing that can end me, and I couldn't find it. He looked at her, and then his daughter shows up on the Meridian Dawn, and I think finally she's going to lead me to it. Because if anyone knows where Thomas Carter Bay hid the one thing that can destroy me, it's the daughter he trained for 11 years. The room was silent, and Emily understood in that moment the full shape of the trap she was in, and it was worse than she'd planned for, and also in a strange way exactly what she'd hoped for. Voss wasn't keeping her alive to get the evidence off the Meridian Dawn. That evidence he could burn. He was keeping her alive because he believed she was the key to something her father had hidden 14 years ago, the one thing that could actually end him. The problem was that Emily had no idea what that thing was. Her father had never told her. In 11 years of training in all the survival and the navigation and the medicine and the reading of men, Thomas Carter had never once mentioned a document or a recording that could destroy Grant Voss. He'd told her to find the truth. He'd never told her he'd already hidden a piece of it, which meant that Grant Voss was going to keep her alive and take her apart day by day looking for the location of something Emily genuinely did not know existed. And when he finally believed she didn't have it, he would kill her because she'd be useless, and worse, because she'd know he was still looking. She had built her whole plan around being a copy Voss couldn't destroy. And it turned out she was something else entirely. She was a treasure map to a treasure she'd never been told about. She had 48 hours before Reynolds and Hayes came. She told them she could survive that long, and she'd based that on the assumption that Voss would ration his interrogation to keep her useful. But a Voss who thought she knew the location of the one thing that could end him wouldn't ration anything. He'd want it now. Tonight. He'd take her apart fast. Emily did the math again the way she'd done it in the Water Cold and Clear, and the math said she'd made a mistake and the mistake might kill her. But Thomas Carter had not trained his daughter to freeze when the math went bad. You're right, Emily said. Voss's eyes sharpened. About what? About my father hiding something. He did. She said it slowly, feeling her way, because she was about to gamble everything on a lie built out of the one true thing she had, which was that she knew her father better than any human being alive. He hid it, and he hid it from you, and he hid it so well that even the people looking for it for 14 years never found it. She leaned forward. But you've made a mistake too, Admiral. You think he told me where it is. He didn't. My father would never have put that on me. He'd never have made his 15-year-old daughter the keeper of the thing that got him killed. That's not who he was. He loved me too much. Oh, my goodness. Her voice caught real emotion breaking through the strategy, because this part was true. All of it was true. He didn't tell me where he hid it. He did something smarter. He hid it somewhere only I could find it without ever telling me it was there. He built me a trail I wouldn't recognize until I was standing in it. Voss stared at her. Explain. You knew my father as an officer, Emily said. I knew him as a father. He taught me things. Places we went. Words we used. Codes we made up when I was little games we played that meant nothing to anyone but us. She met his eyes. If my father hid something that only I could find, then he hid it inside one of those things. Something between him and me that you could torture out of me for a year and never understand because you'd have the words and not the meaning. You'd have the map and not the language it's written in. She let that land. That's why you can't just take me apart, Admiral. Because whatever my father left, I have to find it. Willingly, thinking, remembering, following the trail he built. You can't beat it out of me. You can't drug it out of me. You can only ask me nicely and hope I decide to look. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever said because it was half a lie. And if Voss saw the seam, he'd know she was buying time and he'd stop being patient. But it was also underneath completely true. Because Emily had just realized sitting in that room that if her father really had hidden something, he would have hidden it exactly that way. In the language only the two of them spoke. And that meant that somewhere in 14 years of memory, in the games and the codes and the places says, they'd gone there might actually be a trail she'd never known to look for. She'd told Voss a strategic lie, and in telling it, she'd stumbled onto a real possibility. Her father might have left her something after all, and she'd spent 14 years so focused on finding out what happened to him that she'd never once looked for what he might have left behind. Voss was quiet for a long time. Emily watched him weigh it, watched the cold machine behind his eyes turn the problem over, and she knew the exact moment he decided to believe her, because the tension went out of his shoulders, replaced by something worse, a patient, predatory calm. All right, Voss said, let's say I believe you. Let's say your father hid it in your childhood in a language only you speak. He smiled thinly. Then we're going to spend some time together, you and I, and you're going to remember every place, every game, every code, and we're going to follow your father's trail one step at a time until it leads us to the thing he hid. He stood. And Emily, I want to be very clear about something because you're clever, and you'll be tempted to lead me in circles to stall, to waste my time hoping for a rescue that isn't coming. He leaned both hands on the table and put his face close to hers. Every hour you waste, I'm going to give you a reason not to waste the next one. I won't touch you. I don't need to. But there are people you care about. The old man who came to your rescue, Richard Hayes. The commander who pulled you out of the water. That young corpsman who couldn't stop looking at you like you hung the moon. His voice was almost tender. I know all their names now, Emily. I read the rescue report. And every hour you stall, one of them becomes a problem I solve. Do you understand? You're not the only insurance policy in this room anymore. Now they are, and I'm holding them. And Emily Carter, who had walked into this facility believing she held all the leverage, understood that in the space of one conversation, Grant Voss had turned the entire game around and taken it from her. He left. The door locked. And Emily sat alone in the room and did the only thing she could do, which was think faster and harder than she'd ever thought in her life, because the plan she'd walked in with was dead, and she had maybe 40 hours to build a new one out of nothing but memory. She thought about her father. She thought about him the way she hadn't let herself in years, not as a mystery to solve, but as a mom, her father. Man who'd wake her before dawn to watch the stars and quiz her on the constellations. The man who'd taught her to set a broken bone on a doll before she could read. The man who'd made everything into a game, because he'd understood that a child learns what she plays. The games, he'd made codes with her. Little ones. Ways of saying things so that only the two of them understood. A whole private language. And Emily's breath caught because she remembered something. She remembered a thing her father had said to her over and over when she was small, a thing she'd always taken as just a saying, just a piece of the private language, and never once thought to question. He used to tap her on the chest right over her heart and say, "This is where I keep the important things, not in a safe, not in a box, here, where nobody can take it." And she'd put her hand over his and say it back, their little ritual, and she'd never once thought it meant anything but love. But her father did nothing by accident. Her father built trails a child wouldn't recognize until she was standing on them, where nobody can take it, not in a safe, not in a box. Emily's mind raced. If her father had hidden something that only she could find, and he'd spent her childhood telling her that the important things were kept in the heart, where nobody could take them, then maybe he hadn't hidden a document at all. Maybe he'd hidden it the way you hide something in plain sight, inside a person, inside a memory, inside something Emily already carried and never knew was a container. And then she remembered the necklace. Not the waterproof case she'd carried through the ocean. That held the Meridian Dawn evidence, the deniable stuff, the stuff Voss could burn. She'd handed that off to Hayes. The other necklace, the small silver one her father had given her the last time she saw him 14 years ago when she was 15, the last thing he ever put in her hands. A simple thing, a little silver disc on a chain worn so long she'd stopped seeing it. She'd worn it every day for 14 years. She was wearing it right now under the borrowed utilities against her chest, right over her heart, where I keep the important things. Here, where nobody can take it. Emily's hands began very slowly to shake. For 14 years, she had worn her father's last gift against her heart, and for 14 years, she had thought it was just a keepsake, a memory, a piece of him to hold on to. And she had spent those same 14 years searching the whole world for the truth about his death, chasing ships and records, and men following every trail except the one he'd hung around her neck himself, and told her in the only language they shared exactly where to look. Here, where nobody can take it. He hadn't been able to protect her from the world that was coming, but he'd been able to do one thing. He'd been able to give his daughter the one piece of evidence that could destroy Grant Voss and hide it so perfectly in plain sight, in a language only the two of them spoke, that even the man who'd hunted it for 14 years had stood 3 feet from it on a flight deck and seen nothing but a corpsman's necklace. Emily pressed her hand over her heart, over the little silver disc, and for the first time in 14 years, she let herself cry quietly in a locked room in Grant Voss's facility, because her father had never abandoned her, had never left her searching in the dark. He'd handed her the answer with his own hands and trusted that someday when she was ready, she'd finally understand what he'd meant. She was ready now. But understanding it was one thing. Surviving long enough to use it was another. Because the moment Voss realized the thing he'd hunted for 14 years was hanging around her neck, the entire equation changed. Right now, he kept her alive because he thought she was a map to a buried treasure. The second he knew the treasure was on her body, she stopped being a map and became an obstacle. The last obstacle, the only thing standing between him and the object he'd killed to bury. Which meant the necklace was both her salvation and her death sentence. As long as Voss didn't know she was safe. The instant he knew she was finished. And Voss was patient and thorough, and he was going to have to spend the next 40 hours taking her apart, looking for exactly this. Sooner or later, he'd search her. Sooner or later, he'd hold the answer in his own hand and not know it the way he had on the flight deck. And Emily's whole survival now depended on making sure that when he did, he'd have no reason to look twice at a 15-year-old girl's silver keepsake. She wiped her face. She steadied her breathing. She began once more to think. She had until Reynolds and Hayes came. 40 hours, maybe less. She had the one thing Grant Voss had lost sleep over for 14 years hanging against her heart. She had a man across the hall who would peel her life apart, layer by layer to find it, and who now held the lives of the only 3 people left in the world she cared about. And she had finally her father's voice in her head, clear as the morning he'd first tapped her chest and told her where the important things were kept. Not in a safe, Emily. Not in a box. Here, where nobody can take it. Okay, Dad, she whispered to the empty room, and she wrapped her fingers around the little silver disc through the fabric of the borrowed uniform. Okay, I finally found it. Now help me figure out how to keep it. And somewhere in the dark behind her eyes, 14 years of grief began very slowly to turn into something else. Not fear, not sorrow, a plan. The door lock clicked. Grant Voss was coming back. Emily let go of the necklace, folded her hands on the table, and looked up with the tired, cooperative eyes of a woman with nothing to hide and everything to remember. Voss sat down across from her with a legal pad and a pen, like a man settling in for a long interview. And Emily understood that the torture he'd promised wasn't going to be physical at all. It was going to be worse. He was going to make her walk back through her own childhood out loud and hand him her father piece by piece, and she was going to have to do it convincingly while the answer he was hunting hung against her heart, warm from her own skin. Start at the beginning, Voss said. The places. Where did your father take you? The special places, the ones that meant something. Let's build the map. And Emily began to talk. She gave him real places. That was the only way to survive it, because a lie about her own childhood would have a false note in it, and Voss listened the way a polygraph listens. So she gave him the real cabin in the mountains, the real lake, the real diner where her father took her every Sunday and let her order pie for breakfast. She gave him true things and she watched him write them down, and she felt something obscene about it, this man's pen turning her father's love into intelligence. But she gave him true things that led nowhere. That was the game. Every place she named was real, and every place she named was a dead end, and Voss couldn't tell the difference because he hadn't been there. He'd only had her father as an officer. He'd never once seen Thomas Carter be a father, and that blindness was the only weapon Emily had. The lake, Voss said, tapping the pad. You said he taught you to swim there, to hold your breath. That's interesting, given how you survived the ocean. Did he ever hide anything there? A container, a locker, a safe deposit box in the nearest town? No, Emily said, and it was true. He never hid anything anywhere I could point to on a map. That's what I'm trying to make you understand. My father didn't hide things in places. He hid them in me. So you keep saying. Voss set down the pen. And yet in 4 hours, you haven't led me one step closer to it. You've given me a very moving tour of your childhood and nothing else. I'm starting to wonder if there's a trail at all, Emily, or if you're just a girl who watched too many movies and decided she was a spy. Emily's stomach dropped because this was the moment she'd feared, the moment Voss started to doubt she was worth keeping alive. She needed to give him something real, something that felt like progress without giving him the thing. So she gave him her father's voice. He used to tell me the important things aren't kept in safes, she said quietly, or boxes. He'd tap my chest right here and say the important things are kept in the heart where nobody can take them. She watched Voss's face. For years I thought it was just something a dad says, but you knew him as an officer. Tell me, did Thomas Carter ever say anything to you that seemed sentimental at the time and turned out to mean something operational? And she saw it work. She saw Voss's eyes narrow, saw him take the bait because she just handed him a genuine piece of her father's private language and framed it as a clue, and a man hunting a trail cannot resist a clue. Where nobody can take it, Voss repeated slowly. A metaphor or a location. The heart, something at the center of something. He picked the pen back up. Did he have a place he called the heart a room, a building, I don't know, Emily said. That's what I'm trying to figure out. That's why I need time and quiet and no one threatening the people I care about, because I can't remember with a gun to my head. Nobody can. Fear makes you stupid. You know that better than anyone. She leaned forward. You want me to find this thing? Then let me find it. Stop threatening Hayes. Stop threatening the commander. Every time you do, you shut down the exact part of my brain you need working. It was a genuine tactical truth wrapped around a desperate lie. And Voss knew half of it was manipulation and couldn't tell which half, and that uncertainty was the whole game. He studied her for a long moment. 12 hours, he said finally. I'll give you 12 hours of quiet to remember. No threats, no pressure, and in 12 hours you're going to give me a location or a direction or something I can act on. And if you don't, he stood, then I'll stop believing there's a trail at all, and I'll go back to my other theory, which is that everything I need is somewhere on your body or in your head, and I'll take both apart to be sure. 12 hours, Emily. He left. And Emily Carter sat alone with 12 hours and the answer around her neck and the growing terrible certainty that 12 hours was not going to be enough for Reynolds and Hayes to reach her, because she'd told them 48 and it had only been 12, and she'd have to survive the gap between what she'd promised and what was real. Ashore 30 miles away, Richard Hayes was learning something that turned his blood to ice. He and Reynolds had spent the first 12 hours doing exactly what Emily had bought them time to do, moving the Meridian Dawn evidence into channels Voss couldn't reach, and building a picture of the facility from the coordinates she'd hidden in the follow-up form. Reynolds had pulled in 2 operators he trusted with his life. Jake had refused to be left behind, and Reynolds had stopped arguing when he saw the young medic's face. But it was Hayes who found the problem. The facility's real, Hayes said, spreading everything he'd gathered across the table. Off books, but real. Voss has run it for years, and I've confirmed the coordinates Emily sent. That part checks out. He paused. But there's something wrong with the timeline she gave us. She said 48 hours. She said she could survive 48 hours. So we've got time, Reynolds said. No, Hayes said. That's what's wrong. Emily doesn't make math errors. She calculated a current in the open ocean to within 11 miles after 3 days with no instruments. She doesn't guess. So if she told us 48 hours, it's because 48 hours is what she needed it to be for us to plan a real operation and not get ourselves killed rushing in. He looked up and his face was gray. She rounded up. She gave us the number that would keep us from doing something stupid, not the number that was true. The real number is shorter. It's always been shorter. She lied to us about her own survival window so we wouldn't panic. The room went silent. How much shorter? Jake asked. I don't know, Hayes said. But I know Grant Voss, and I know that a Voss who's got Thomas Carter's daughter in a locked room is not a patient man. He's waited 14 years. He's not going to wait 48 more hours to start. He stood. She gave us the time we needed to do it right. And she's paying for that time with every hour she's in there. We don't have 48 hours. We might not have 12. We move now. We're not ready, Reynolds said. We move now, half-planned against a facility we've never seen, and we die, and so does she. And if we wait until we're ready, she might already be dead. Hayes put both hands flat on the table. You want to know the worst part? She knew. She knew when she wrote 48 that it was a lie. She knew she was giving us a number that might get her killed because a true number would have made us reckless and gotten all of us killed. She did the math and decided her own life was the acceptable cost of us surviving. His voice cracked. That's exactly what her father did. 14 years ago. He gave me a number too. He told me he had time. He didn't. And I believed him because believing him was easier than the truth, and by the time I understood, he was gone. Hayes looked around the room. I am not doing that again. I am not sitting in a safe room trusting a Carter's math while a Carter dies to protect me. We move. Half ready. Now. And we get her out before Voss figures out what I just figured out, which is that she's the most dangerous person in that building, and he's been treating her like a witness. Reynolds looked at his operators. He looked at Jake, and then he made the call. He'd been making his whole career the call to trust the person on the ground over the plan on the table. Gear up, Reynolds said. We move in 1 hour. Hayes, you get us to the door. I'll get us through it. In the locked room, Emily had spent her 12 hours doing two things at once. The first was building the story she'd feed Voss, the false trail that felt like progress, the breadcrumbs that would keep him hunting a treasure that was already around her neck. She had it ready, a place her father had called jokingly the heart of the mountain, an old fire lookout tower they'd hiked to when she was 10. It was real. Voss could verify it existed, and it was 300 miles away, which meant that if she could sell it, Voss would have to send men to search it, and a Voss with men away, searching a mountain was a Voss with fewer men in this building. The second thing she did was prepare for the moment she knew was coming, the moment Voss searched her. Because he would. Sooner or later, he'd stop trusting the trail and check the obvious, and he'd find the necklace, and everything would hinge on whether he saw a keepsake or saw the answer. So Emily did something that cost her more than anything had cost her in 14 years. She took the necklace off. Her hands shook doing it because it was the last thing her father ever gave her, and she'd worn it every day since she was 15, and taking it off felt like letting go of his hand all over again. But she understood now that the necklace was a container, and a container the enemy is actively hunting cannot be hidden on your body because your body is the first place he'll look. She needed to hide it somewhere. Voss would never think to search, and she needed to leave something in its place so that when he searched her and found a necklace, it would be the wrong necklace. A decoy that told him nothing. There was nothing in the room. No tools, no materials, nothing. Except that Emily Carter had spent 3 days surviving an ocean with nothing, and a woman who can survive an ocean with nothing can hide a silver disc in a bare room if she's her father's daughter. She worked fast and quiet, and when she was done, the important thing was hidden, and around her neck was the empty chain, and she sat back down and folded her hands, and she was ready. The door opened, but it wasn't Voss. It was one of the two men who weren't sailors, the taller one with the right-handed draw, and he came in without a word and stood too close, and Emily understood immediately that Voss had changed his mind, that the 12 hours of quiet were over, that something had shifted. On your feet, the man said. The Admiral wants to search you. And Emily's heart, which she'd trained for 14 years to stay level, began to pound because the moment had come early and everything depended on the next 60 seconds. She stood. She let him search her. She kept her breathing even and her face bored and her eyes tired, and she felt his hands find the chain around her neck, and pull it out, and she watched his face as he looked at the empty chain with no disc on it, and she watched him decide it was nothing. A broken necklace, a woman's sentimental junk. Chained, the man reported into a radio, no pendant, empty. And Emily let out a breath so slow and so controlled that the man didn't see it, and she thought, thank you, Dad, where nobody can take it. Not even now. They walked her back to Voss. He was standing when she came in, and there was a new energy in the room, a coiled readiness that told Emily the patient interviewer was gone, and something more dangerous had replaced him. I've been thinking about your metaphor, Voss said without preamble. The heart, where nobody can take it. And I had a thought, Emily, that I should have had hours ago. He came around the table toward her. You've been so careful to tell me your father hid things in you, not in places, in your memory, in your childhood. And I've been so busy chasing places that I never asked the obvious question. He stopped in front of her. What if he didn't mean your memory at all? What if where nobody can take it was literal? What if he hid the actual thing on you 14 years ago, and you've been carrying it this whole time without knowing? Emily's blood ran cold. He was there. He was one step from it. My men just searched you, Voss continued, and do you know what they found? An empty chain, a necklace with no pendant. He tilted on his head. Now, why would a woman wear an empty chain, Emily? Why would you keep a necklace that's lost whatever hung on it? And Emily made the hardest decision of her life in half a second, which was to tell the truth, because the truth was the only lie he wouldn't see through. Because my father gave it to me, she said, and let her voice break, and it wasn't acting. None of it was acting. The last time I saw him, there was a pendant, a little silver disc, and I lost it years ago, and I couldn't bring myself to stop wearing the chain because it was the last thing he ever touched. The tears were real. You want to know where the pendant is? I don't know. I lost it a decade ago. It's probably at the bottom of a drawer in a house I don't live in anymore. If my father hid something in it, then he hid it in the one thing I was careless enough to lose, and it's gone, and I've spent 14 years wearing an empty chain like an idiot, and you've just made me realize it. It was perfect because it was true in every particular except one. She had not lost the pendant. She had hidden it 40 minutes ago in this building. But every word she'd said was true, and the grief was true, and Voss, who could read a lie in a heartbeat, read all the truth and believed the whole thing. She watched 14 years of certainty collapse in his face. You lost it, Voss said flatly. I lost it, Emily said, and she let herself sob, and it was real, all of it, the grief and the fear and the 14-year, and she used every ounce of it as a weapon. Do you understand what you've just done to me? You've spent this whole time telling me my father left me something, and I let myself believe it. I let myself hope. And now you're telling me it was in the one thing I was too stupid to keep. You've taken him from me twice. And Grant Voss, standing in front of a weeping woman, felt the first real doubt he'd felt in 14 years, the terrible possibility that the thing he'd hunted his whole life had been lost by a careless teenager and was gone forever, unrecoverable. A pendant in a drawer in a house that had probably been sold. It was the most dangerous moment of Emily's life, because a Voss who believed the evidence was lost forever had no more reason to keep her alive. She'd played the only card that could save her, and it might be the card that killed her. Voss stared at her for a long, long moment, and then his radio crackled, and a voice said the three words that changed everything. Perimeter breach, multiple contacts. Voss's head came up. Emily's heart stopped. They'd come. Hayes and Reynolds had come. Early, hours early. And Emily understood in a flash that they'd figured out the truth, that 48 had been a lie. And they'd moved before they were ready. And now they were fighting their way into a facility full of Voss's men. And it was because of her, because she'd lied to protect them, and they'd seen through it and come anyway. Voss turned on her, and the doubt was gone from his face, replaced by pure murderous calculation. They came for you, he said softly. The old man and the commander. Which means you're worth coming for. Which means you're not a careless girl who lost a pendant. Which means you've been lying to me this whole time, and the thing I'm looking for is not lost at all. He drew his sidearm. It's here. It's on you or in this building, and you know exactly where, and I don't have time to be patient anymore. The facility shook with the distant sound of the assault. And Emily Carter, unarmed in a locked room, looked at the gun in Grant Voss's hand, and knew that the next 60 seconds would decide whether 14 years ended in the truth or in another rewritten mission report, another disappeared body, another lie dressed up as an accident. The door burst inward. But it was neither Hayes nor Reynolds who came through it. It was the tall man with the right-handed draw blood on his shirt weapon up, shouting that the perimeter was collapsing, that there were only minutes. And in the half-second that Grant Voss turned his head toward his man, in the half-second his gun drifted off. Her Emily, Carter did the thing her father had trained her to do for 11 years. The thing 11 years of games and codes and survival and quiet, patient teaching had been building toward without either of them ever saying it aloud. She moved. Not like a corpsman, not like a survivor, like Admiral Thomas Carter's daughter, trained from childhood by one of the finest special operations officers the Navy ever produced for exactly this moment against exactly this man. She crossed the distance before Voss's gun came back around, and she took the wrist and she turned it, and the shot went into the ceiling, and then Emily Carter and the man who murdered her father were fighting for the weapon in a locked room while the facility came apart around them, and 14 years of grief and rage and patience and love poured out of her all at once. And Grant Voss, for the first time in his life, understood that he had not captured a witness. He had captured a weapon her father had spent 11 years building, and then fatally he had put it in a room and given it a reason. The gun went off a second time, the round tearing into the wall just past Emily's head, and the tall man in the doorway raised his own weapon to fire on her, but there was no angle he could take that wouldn't put a round through Voss too. And in that single heartbeat of hesitation, the whole facility chose to come apart at once. Reynolds came through the door low and fast, and he did not hesitate the way the tall man had, and he put the man down before the man could solve the geometry of the shot. Behind Reynolds came Jake, his sidearm up and his hands not steady, and behind Jake came Richard Hayes, and an old man moving with the terrible focus of someone who had waited 14 years to walk through exactly this door and was not going to waste a second of it now that it was open. "Emily!" Hayes shouted. She had Voss's wrist bent back at an angle that should have made him drop the weapon, that would have made any ordinary man drop the weapon. But Grant Voss was not ordinary, and he was not afraid of pain. He was afraid of the thing that was collapsing around him. And a man who has stopped being afraid of pain is stronger than he has any right to be. He wrenched his arm free. He got a step of distance. He brought the gun up. And for one frozen instant, the barrel was pointed at the center of Emily's chest, at the empty chain at the exact place over her heart, where her father's answer had hung for 14 years. "Nobody moved," Voss said. Everybody stopped. "That's better." He was breathing hard, and there was blood on his sleeve from where the tall man had gone down beside him, but his hand was steady, and his eyes were the flat, pale eyes Emily had first seen on the flight deck, the last thing her father ever saw. 14 years I've kept this quiet. 14 years I've been careful. And now I've got half of Naval Special Warfare bleeding on my floor, and a retired ghost pointing a gun at me, and a corpsman who thinks she's a spy, all because I made the mistake of trying to do this cleanly." His mouth twisted. "So we're going to be very clear about the situation. Anybody fires, I fire first, and I put it right through her, and whatever's in her head, whatever her father told her, dies with her. You lose everything, so put them down. All of you. Now." "Uncle Rich," Emily said quietly. "Don't. Emily." "He needs me alive," Emily said, and her voice was calm, calmer than a woman with a gun on her heart had any right to be. "He's not going to fire. He can't fire because the second he kills me, he loses the one thing he's spent 14 years hunting, and he knows it. He's bluffing with the only card he has left, which is my life, and he's bluffing because he's out of everything else." She kept her eyes on Voss the entire time. "Isn't that right, Admiral? You can't shoot me. You've never been able to shoot me. That's the whole reason I'm still breathing." "Try me," Voss said. "I don't have to try you," Emily said. "I've studied you for 14 years. I know you the way you never bothered to know my father or me. And I know that you did not come down out of the sky and fly me to your secret little facility and wait 14 years for this exact moment just to pull a trigger and lose forever. You want to know where it is? You have wanted to know where it is every single day for 14 years, and you are not going to trade the only chance you'll ever have to find out for the satisfaction of watching me die." She took one slow step forward into the gun. "So put it down or don't. but you're not going to fire. You've already told me you won't 100 times in every choice you've made since San Diego. I just listened better than you thought. The room held its breath, and Grant Voss, for one endless second, did the arithmetic Emily had already done for him, and he arrived at the same answer she had, which was that he was trapped, that his own need had trapped him, that the very thing that had kept her alive was now the thing that kept him from killing her. His hand wavered. It was all Emily needed. "Jake," she said without turning her head, "now." And Jake Harrison, who had spent the entire operation being exactly what she trained him to be on that boat 4 days ago. The least interesting person in the room. The quiet one nobody watches, the one who keeps the exit in view and waits for the shot that comes from the direction no one is looking. Took it. The round went through Voss's shoulder, his gun shoulder, and the weapon spun out of his hand and skidded across the floor, and Grant Voss went down for the last time. It was over that fast, not with a speech, not with a reckoning, with a man on the floor holding his shoulder in the sudden roaring, ringing silence of a fight that is simply stopped. Emily did not go for the gun. She did not go for Voss. Reynolds already had that handled, was already crossing to put a knee in the Admiral's back and pull his hands behind him. Emily turned instead immediately to Jake, because Jake was standing there with his weapon still up and his arms locked and his face gone the color of ash. And she knew that look, she'd seen it on young men before, the look of someone who has just crossed a line they can never uncross. She crossed to him and put her other hand over the top of his weapon and pressed it down gently, the way you'd guide a frightened patient, until the muzzle pointed at the floor. "Breathe," she said. "It's done. Breathe, Jake." "I shot him," Jake said. His voice didn't sound like his own. "He's an admiral. I just shot a United States admiral. You shot a murderer who was pointing a gun at my heart," Emily said. "There's a difference, and it matters, and you're going to have to hold on to that difference for the rest of your life, because otherwise this is going to eat you." She kept her hand on his. "I know you've never done that before. I know you're a medic, that your whole job is the opposite of this, and I need you to hear me. You did right. You saved my life. And the fact that it's tearing you up inside right now is the exact reason I trust you with it. Because the day it stops tearing you up is the day you've become something you don't want to be." Jake's arms began very slowly to shake themselves loose. "How do you do it?" he whispered. "How do you stay so calm?" "I don't," Emily said quietly. "I'm going to fall apart later. I've been falling apart for 14 years, a little at a time in private, where nobody could take it away from me. That's the trick. You don't stay calm. You just decide when you're allowed to break, and you don't let the enemy pick the time." She squeezed his hand once. "Right now we're not allowed. Later we are. Breathe with me. In for 4. And Jake breathed with her in for 4, and something in his shoulders came down out of his ears, and he was still shaking, but he was there. He was present. He was a man, something instead of a machine that had just fired a shot. "There you are," Emily said. "Welcome back." On the floor, Grant Voss was laughing. It was a wet, hateful sound, and it made everyone turn, and Voss looked up at them from under Reynolds' knee with his cheek against the ground and blood running down his arm, and his eyes still somehow full of the old certainty. "You think you've won," Voss said. "You sweet, stupid children. You think you shoot an admiral in a black facility that doesn't exist and the truth just comes out. That's not how it works. That's never how it works." He coughed. "I've spent 14 years making sure there is no evidence. There's a wounded flag officer and a retired ghost with a grudge and a special operator who just committed a career-ending felony, and a corpsman whose whole story is that her dead daddy told her secrets when she was a little girl." He fixed his eyes on Hayes. "You know how this ends, Richard. You have buried enough of these. I make some calls. The right people close ranks. And in 6 months, you're the ones on trial, and I'm the admiral who was assaulted by conspiracy theorists, and everything you think you have turns into nothing but the ravings of a woman who can't accept that her father died in an accident. I've done it before. I did it to Thomas. And I'll do it to all of you before I'll ever let this see daylight." Hayes crouched down slowly until he was level with Voss's face, and for a long moment the old man just looked at the man he had suspected and feared and hated. For 14 years, finally on the floor at his feet, finally bleeding, finally not in control of the room. "You know," Hayes said, "for 14 years I was afraid of you. I want you to know that. You cost me the best friend I ever had, and I couldn't prove it, and I lived with that every single day. And every single day, I was afraid because a man who can make Thomas Carter disappear can make anyone disappear. He tilted his head. And then this morning, I watched a woman I've known since she was a baby walk onto a helicopter with you on purpose to hand us your front door. And I realized something, Grant. I realized I'd spent 14 years being afraid of the wrong thing. You were never the strong one in that operation. Thomas was. He beat you 14 years ago. He just didn't live to see it. Hayes stood back up. Emily, would you like to answer the man he keeps asking where the evidence is? And Emily walked across the room past Voss to the table she had sat at for hours, and she crouched, and she reached up into the narrow gap between the tabletop and its metal frame, into the exact place where 40 minutes earlier she had wedged a small silver disc, hidden not on her body where any search would find it, but in plain sight in the room, in the one place no one hunting a person's body would ever think to look. She stood and she opened her hand, and there it was. A little silver pendant worn smooth by 14 years against a girl's heart. Voss went still. My father gave me this the last time I ever saw him, Emily said. She was not talking to Voss now. She was talking to the room, to all of them, to the 14 years. I was 15. He was about to walk into a mission I now know never existed, walk in knowing he might not come back. And the last thing he did before he left was put this around my neck. And he tapped my chest right here, the way he'd done 1,000 times since I was little. And he said the important things aren't kept in a safe, not in a box here, where nobody can take it. Her voice thickened, and she let it. And I thought he meant love. I thought it was just my dad being my dad. I wore it every day for 14 years, and I thought it was a keepsake, a piece of him to hold on to. And I searched the entire world for the truth about what happened to him. Every ship, every record, every man, and never once, not one single time did I think to look at the thing hanging around my own neck. She turned the disc over. There was a seam in it almost invisible. Because he did not hide it in a place, Admiral. You spent all those hours making me name places, the cabin, the lake, the fire tower, and you were looking in exactly the wrong direction, and I let you because that was the only way to stay alive long enough for that door to open. She held the pendant up so the light caught it. He hid it in me. He built a data drive into a child's keepsake, encrypted it in a language only I can read, a language he taught me when I was small and called a game. And then he hung it around his 15-year-old daughter's neck and told her it was just to remember him by. And he trusted that someday when it mattered, when I was finally ready, I would understand what he'd actually given me. Her eyes came up and found Voss. You searched me tonight. Your man pulled this chain out and looked at it and reported an empty necklace, no pendant, because I'd taken it off 40 minutes before and hidden it in a table. You stood 3 feet from it on that flight deck 4 days ago and saw Corman's cheap silver disc. You have been within arm's reach of the one thing that can destroy you at least twice, and you never saw it, not once, because you never once understood the man you murdered or the daughter he trained. That's 14 years, Voss said, and for the first time his voice had cracked all the way through, and what came out underneath was not certainty, but something small and hollow. 14 years I looked for that. I didn't sleep. I didn't 14 years. I know, Emily said. It was around my neck the whole time, over my heart, where nobody could take it. She closed her hand around it. He told you it existed right at the end when he thought it might save him. And it didn't save him because you killed him anyway, but it was never meant to save him, Admiral. It was meant to save the truth. He knew he might lose. He planned for losing. He put the one thing that could end you in the one place you'd never look, and he waited 14 years from inside a grave you dug for him, for his daughter to grow up and finish it. Her voice was steady as stone now. You didn't lose today. You lost 14 years ago, the day you decided Thomas Carter's daughter was a girl instead of his legacy. Everything since then has just been the world catching up to a fight he already won. Voss said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Reynolds finished cuffing him and hauled him up, and the man who had rewritten the Navy's memory for 14 years was walked out of his own facility with his hands behind his back, and he did not look like an admiral anymore. He looked like a small, tired, ordinary man who had spent his whole life afraid of a necklace. The aftermath took 18 months, and it did not go the way Grant Voss had promised on the floor of that room. Because Emily had been right about the war that comes after the war. She had built it into everything from the very first hour on the boat. She had understood in a way that Voss, with all his power, never had, that the fight was never really about who held the gun in the room. It was about who controlled the story once the guns were down, and she had spent every move she made making sure that the story could never again be controlled by one man. Petty Officer Cruz had written down everything he saw, times and names and words, the moment Emily left the ship exactly as she'd told him to, and had signed it and given it to someone off the vessel where no order could reach it. Reynolds' flight deck officer had recorded every second of the custody transfer, every word Voss said on the record in front of witnesses, in a place it could not be unhappened. Hayes's channels had surfaced the Meridian Dawn evidence in a dozen places at once. The instant Emily vanished into the facility, exactly the way she'd threatened Voss she would, so that when the investigation opened, there was already a trail no one could bury. And at the center of all of it, decrypted at last by the only living person who spoke the language her father had taught her as a child, was the little silver disc. 14 years of an admiral's careful, patient, damning proof. The operation, the team that had been sent to die, the orders, the names of the men who gave them, and the names of the men above those men who had spent 14 years protecting Grant Voss, because his survival was their survival too. Voss had believed right up to the end that he could always come control them up, story afterward, the way he had for 14 years. Emily Carter made sure there was no afterward left for him to control. She had not simply survived him. She had built brick by patient brick over 14 years of grief and 72 hours in the open ocean and 40 hours in a locked room and one final gamble with a gun on her heart, a truth so distributed and so witnessed and so deeply proven that it could not be rewritten because too many hands were holding pieces of it on the record in places his reach could no longer touch. The men above Voss tried at first to do exactly what he'd promised. They tried to close ranks. They tried to make it the ravings of a grieving daughter and a bitter old ghost. And for a few weeks it even looked like it might work the way it had always worked before. And then the disc came out in full, and the recordings in her father's own voice came out, and the flight deck officer's tape came out, and Cruz's statement came out, and one by one the men who had planned to bury Emily Carter discovered that they could not bury a truth that was already standing in 100 rooms at once. And the ranks that had closed for 14 years finally catastrophically broke. The corruption Thomas Carter had died to expose came into the light, all of it. And the team that had been sent to die and then buried as a training accident to protect the men who'd killed them got their names back, and their families got the truth. And the truth was not that their sons and husbands had died to carelessness. The truth was that they had died as soldiers betrayed by their own, and that a man named Thomas Carter had found out and refused to let it stay hidden, and had paid for it with his life, and had reached across 14 years and death itself to finish, through his daughter, the fight he'd started. Grant Voss answered for all of it. So did the men above him. It was, by the time it was done, the largest reckoning the Navy had seen in a generation, and it started with a corpsman the ocean couldn't kill, and a necklace nobody thought to look at twice. They held a ceremony for Thomas Carter, finally, a real one. Not the empty box and the vague words of 14 years ago, but the truth at last spoken out loud in front of everyone who should have heard it the first time. Richard Hayes was supposed to speak. He stood at the front and he opened his mouth, and for a long moment, nothing came out, because there are some griefs that 14 years does not soften, only deepen, and the weight of finally being allowed to say it was more than the old man could carry alone. And it was Emily who came up beside him and put her hand over his the way her father used to put his hand over hers, and finished it for him. She talked about a man who had made everything into a game because he understood that a child learns what she plays. She talked about a father who woke his daughter before dawn to watch the stars, not knowing he was teaching her the navigation that would keep her alive in an ocean 14 years later. She talked about a man who could not protect his daughter from the world that was coming for them both, and so had done the only thing he could, which was to hand her the tools to survive it one game at a time and trust her to grow into the person who could use them. He didn't train me to fight, Emily told the room. Everyone assumes he did. He didn't. He trained me to see, to notice what everyone else missed, to do the math when the math was all I had, to survive so that someday I could do the thing that actually mattered, which was not revenge and was not a gunfight in a locked room. It was the truth. The last thing he ever said to me before he walked out that door was not fight the enemy. It was not avenge me. It was, "When you're ready, find the truth." Her voice held steady. "It took me 14 years to be ready. But I found it, Dad. I found it right where you put it. And you were right. Nobody could take it." Months after the reckoning was done, Reynolds found Emily at the edge of the base watching the water. The same ocean that had nearly killed her and that had instead carried her home to end the man who had taken everything from her. "You could write your own ticket now," Reynolds said. He came and stood beside her. "You understand that right after all of this. Special Warfare Command would take you tomorrow. Intelligence would take you tonight. Anything you want. You're Thomas Carter's daughter, the woman who brought down Grant Voss and half the men above him." He paused. "You could disappear into the work and never look back. Nobody on earth would blame you. God knows you've earned the right to vanish into something classified and never explain yourself to anyone again." Emily was quiet for a while, watching the waves come in. "That's what everyone expects," she said finally. "The soldier's daughter takes up the sword and rides off into the classified sunset. It's a good story, it's just not mine." She shook her head slowly. "Everyone thinks my father trained me to fight Michael. I told them at the ceremony, but I don't think anyone really heard it. He didn't. He trained me to survive and to see, and the fighting was never the point. Jake took the shot in that room. Not me. And thank God it was him, because the point was never who's the deadliest person standing there when the door comes open." "Then what's the point?" Reynolds asked. "The next ones," Emily said. "The next generation of kids everyone underestimates. The medics, the quiet ones, the ones whose files have 4-year holes in them that nobody explains. The ones people look at and see a corpsman when they should be seeing a legacy." She turned to face him. "My father spent 11 years teaching one girl how to survive a world he was afraid was coming for her, and it saved my life 100 times over. And in the end, it ended a traitor who thought he was untouchable. That's what one person taught, right, believed in, can do. And the world is always, always going to keep producing Grant Vosses. Men who are sure that the person in front of them is nobody. And the only thing that has ever stopped a man like that isn't a better weapon or a bigger rank. It's a person nobody saw coming, trained by someone who believed in them, standing in the right room at the right moment, refusing to look away." "So what are you going to do?" Reynolds asked, though he already suspected he knew. "I'm going to teach," Emily said. "I'm going to build a program. I'm going to take the kids everyone writes off, the ones with the holes in their files and the quiet in their eyes, and I'm going to give them exactly what my father gave me. Not how to kill, how to see, how to notice the young operator dying of heat stroke that every trained man on the boat walked right past, how to keep the exit in view without thinking about it, how to do the math when the math is the only thing you've got left in the whole ocean." Her eyes were bright, because that's the real inheritance, not the fight, the seeing, and it doesn't die with me, and it doesn't die with him. It just gets handed down one kid at a time forever to everyone the world was foolish enough to underestimate. Reynolds was quiet for a long moment, watching her. "Torres asked about you," he said at last. "The lady did he? He wants to know if you would ever take a student who once called a survivor a vegetable to her face on a boat and got shown up so badly for it that he still can't live it down." Reynolds' mouth twitched. His words, mostly his words. "I cleaned them up." Emily laughed. It was the first fully unguarded laugh Reynolds had ever heard from her, young and real, and it took 10 years off her face. "Tell Torres," she said, "that the very first thing I teach every student is that the person you underestimate is the person who's going to save your life, and that he already learned it the hard way on a boat at the top of his lungs in front of his whole team." She smiled, "Which makes him exactly the kind of student I want. The ones who've already been humbled learn the fastest. Tell him to show up. Tell him he's the first one on the list." She reached up and touched the necklace at her throat. The chain was full again. The little silver disc had done its work, its long 14-year mission complete at last, and it hung once more where her father had placed it the last time she saw him alive, over her heart, where nobody could take it. It was just a keepsake again now, just a piece of him to hold on to. But this time she knew exactly what it was, and exactly what it had cost, and exactly what it meant. Emily Carter had gone into the ocean as a woman running from the men who had killed her father, carrying a secret entirely alone. Because for 14 years she had believed that the truth was a burden meant for one person, and that the one person had to be her, and that letting anyone stand beside her was a weakness the world would use against them both. She came out of it as the woman who ended those men, surrounded by people who had chosen freely knowing the cost to stand between her and the dark. An old man who had spent 14 years refusing to fail his best friend's daughter. A commander who had decided that a good order and a right order were not always the same thing and had staked his career on the difference. A young medic who had been the least interesting person in every room, exactly as she'd taught him right up until the moment he saved her life. And a father who had reached out of his own grave across 14 years and finished his fight through the daughter he had loved enough to prepare for a world he wouldn't live to see. 3 days lost at sea did not break Emily Carter. 14 years of grief did not break her. 40 hours in Grant Voss's locked room with the answer against her own heart and a gun in her father's murderer's hand did not break her. Because her father had understood the one thing that men like Voss never will, and had spent 11 years teaching it to his daughter without ever once saying it aloud, and she had spent 14 years learning it the hardest way a person can, and had finally standing at the edge of the ocean that tried to kill her, understood it all the way down to the bottom. Strength is not the thing you survive alone. It is the thing you finally at long last let others carry with you. And a soldier's daughter trained in the dark for a fight she never asked for took everything that was meant to break her. Everything that was meant to bury her the way they buried her father and turned it into the one weapon Grant Voss never saw coming, never understood, and never once in 14 years had any chance against at all. The truth.